Sometimes the mind notices something before you do. A shift in the room. A silence that feels wrong. You tell yourself it's nothing because that's easier. The people in tonight's stories did the same. Until they couldn't anymore. I'm LURK. Leave a like, subscribe, and let's begin. When I was a junior at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, I experienced something that still doesn't sit right with me, even years later. I've tried to explain it logically. I've replayed the events in my head more times than I can count. But no matter how I frame it, there's one part that refuses to make sense. That year, I had just transferred from Roger Williams University to pursue a degree in psychology. It was a big move for me academically and emotionally. I was excited, but also nervous. I ended up rooming with my best friend, someone I've known since I was 12. I'll call them Mista. We had been through so much together already that living in a dorm side by side felt natural. We were staying in one of the dorms near Worcester Dining Hall. I honestly don't even remember the exact building name anymore. What I do remember is the room itself. Typical dorm layout, 2 beds, 2 desks, 2 closets, beige walls, fluorescent lighting. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. We had a close friend named Ramy, who was a year ahead of us. Ramy had always been into spiritual practices, tarot cards, energy readings, cleansing rituals, Ouija boards, though I personally never touch those because they make me deeply uncomfortable. I've always been interested in spiritual things too, but I also try to maintain a healthy level of skepticism. I don't jump to conclusions. I don't automatically blame the supernatural when something strange happens. At the beginning of that semester, Ramy offered to give me one of her old tarot decks. She warned me that sharing tarot decks can sometimes carry energy from the previous owner. She told me that decks bond to people and that passing them on isn't always a simple transaction. She said this particular deck had always felt off to her, like it carried something heavy. I laughed it off at the time. I didn't want to sound dramatic. I accepted the deck anyway. She told me to keep it under my pillow for a few nights, to bond with it, to let my energy connect with it. I did exactly that. I carried it in my bag during the day. I kept it near me in the room. I wanted to treat it properly. At first, nothing unusual happened, but slowly, something shifted. Mista and I started arguing more than usual. Not explosive fights, but small, irritating bickering that felt unnecessary. We had always communicated well. We had known each other for so long that we rarely let misunderstandings linger. But that semester, something felt tense. It was subtle, but noticeable. One night, completely out of nowhere, Mista looked at me and said, "I think something weird is in this room." That stopped me. Mista is not someone who jumps to paranormal conclusions. They're curious about it, sure, but grounded, skeptical. For them to say that without prompting meant something felt genuinely wrong to them. I asked what they meant. They struggled to explain it. They said that at night, when the lights were off, they felt watched. Not in a comforting way. Not like someone protecting them. More like something observing them with intent. Like prey being studied. At that moment, I felt my heart speed up slightly, because I had started to feel something similar. But I didn't say that. I didn't want to influence them or accidentally create a shared delusion. So I told them I hadn't noticed anything unusual. We both tried to brush it off and continued focusing on school. That's when the stress hit me. I was taking statistics and research methods that semester. I am terrible at statistics. It has never been my strong suit. I had failed it the previous semester, and if I failed again, I wouldn't be able to continue in the psychology program. That pressure sat heavy on my shoulders. Normally, stress doesn't break me down. I handle pressure fairly well, but one afternoon I was sitting in a lounge area with Mista and Remy, and I completely fell apart. It came out of nowhere. One second I was working, and the next I felt this overwhelming, crushing sense of despair. It wasn't normal anxiety, it wasn't typical stress. It felt like something darker, a wave of hopelessness so intense that I couldn't breathe properly. I started crying uncontrollably. Mista looked at me like they had never seen me before. Later, they told me that moment scared them, because it wasn't like me. That night, Mista told me something else. They said they felt like whatever presence was in the room was lingering in my closet specifically. They said it felt concentrated there, like that was its space. My stomach dropped when they said that, because I had moved the tarot deck into my closet. I hadn't told them. I had placed it there because I didn't want to lose it and thought it would be safer tucked away. But hearing them independently mention the closet made me uneasy. As a precaution, we decided to give the deck back to Remy. When we told her what had been happening, she didn't seem surprised. She admitted that the deck had always felt wrong to her. She had tried to get rid of it before, but never fully followed through. After we returned the cards, things improved almost immediately. The tension between Mista and me faded. The heavy feeling in the room lifted. The sensation of being watched at night disappeared. My emotional state stabilized. Even my stress about statistics felt more manageable. For weeks, everything felt normal again. Remy graduated that year and moved off campus. We didn't see her often after that. She was busy working and adjusting to post-grad life. We barely had contact. Then, without warning, the strange atmosphere returned. The dread crept back in. The feeling of being watched at night resurfaced. Mista and I began bickering again over trivial things. The heaviness in the room was undeniable. It didn't make sense. We hadn't seen Remy. The cards were gone. We had returned them. As winter break approached, we had to pack up certain belongings so the dorm could be cleaned. I opened my closet to gather my things, and there it was. The tarot deck, sitting on the shelf exactly where I had originally kept it. I froze. I stared at it for several seconds, trying to process what I was seeing. There was no logical explanation. We had physically handed that deck back to Remy weeks earlier. We hadn't seen her since. She didn't have access to our dorm room. Mista came over when they saw my expression. I pointed at the shelf. They went pale. We both knew what it was. We both remembered giving it back. The cards didn't move themselves. Someone would have had to physically place them there. But who? We hadn't given anyone access to the room. There were no signs of forced entry. No missing belongings. Nothing disturbed. We didn't even try to return the deck this time. We didn't want anything to do with it. Instead, we took it and left it somewhere on campus. I won't say exactly where. We just left it, walked away, didn't look back. After that, everything stopped again. The tension lifted, the dread faded, the arguments ceased. To this day, neither of us can explain how the deck returned to the closet. We have discussed it countless times. We replay every step. We question our memory, but we both distinctly remember giving it back. And even now, years later, Mista occasionally brings it up. We both get quiet when we do, because no matter how rational we try to be, that one detail refuses to fit into any logical framework. I haven't had experiences like that since. No lingering presences, no unexplained returns of objects. But that semester at UMass still lingers in my mind like a question mark I can't erase. What unsettles me most isn't the idea of spirits or energy. It's the physical reality of the deck appearing where it shouldn't have been, and the fact that neither of us can explain how it got there. My father has a friend I've heard stories about my whole life. A quiet man, not the kind that brags or talks big, but the kind whose eyes tell you he's seen more than he says. He works as a forest ranger, the kind that spends long stretches alone in remote areas, hiking trails no one's heard of, checking gates most people don't know exist. He's the one who gets called when someone gets lost in the woods, or when hunters don't come back. On top of that, he's also a competitive pistol shooter, not the Hollywood kind who waves a gun around and shouts. The opposite, calm, controlled, the sort of person who can stand still, lower his shoulders, and put round after round into a tiny target faster than most people can even blink. His shooting competitions are about precision under pressure. Who can hit the most targets the fastest without losing accuracy? He's spent years training his hands and brain to stay steady when other people would panic. That combination, forest ranger and expert shooter, ended up being the only reason he and his wife made it home from a drive one afternoon. It started as something completely harmless. He and his wife had joined a local car club. Nothing fancy, just a group of people who loved their vehicles and liked to drive them on weekends. They'd get together, drink coffee in parking lots, talk about engines and paint, argue about the best roads and the worst ones. Every so often, they'd organize something called car poker. The idea was simple. Over the course of a weekend, everyone drove around the region, completing objectives that the group agreed on ahead of time. These objectives were usually places to go or things to find. A certain gas station, a scenic overlook, an old bridge. When you completed an objective, you earned a playing card. At the end of the weekend, everyone met up, compared cards, and the person with the best hand won a small prize and bragging rights. The important part was, you did all of this alone. It wasn't a caravan. The drivers didn't follow each other. Everyone went their own way, choosing their own route, trying to hit all the objectives in whatever order made sense. That's what my father's friend and his wife were doing that day. They were cruising along the back roads of western Washington. It was one of those rare, perfect days. Clear sky, bright sun, just enough wind to keep the air from getting too warm. They had the top down on their convertible, an old British sports car, a Triumph. It was the kind of car that made you feel the road, every bump and shift, and also made you feel like you were part of a different time. They had already hit a few objectives and were heading toward the next one, somewhere near Concrete, Washington. The road they were on was narrow and winding, one of those rural highways that cuts through thick trees and farmland where you don't see many other cars. As they followed the curve of a bend, the peace of the day shattered in an instant. Without warning, a large pickup truck shot out from a side clearing, perpendicular to the road. The truck was dragging a heavy log behind it, chained to the rear bumper. As the driver floored it forward, the log swung across the pavement and skidded into position, blocking both lanes in front of the Triumph. The man slammed the brakes. The convertible jerked to a stop a few yards from the log, tires squealing, heart pounding in his ears. He knew immediately this wasn't an accident. He threw the car into reverse, glanced over his shoulder, and his stomach dropped. Another pickup truck, nearly identical to the first, tore out from behind them, dragging its own log across the road in the same way. The log slid across the asphalt and came to rest behind their car, boxing them in perfectly. The Triumph was trapped between the two logs, with one pickup in front of them, one behind. No room to turn around, no gap to squeeze through, just a small convertible in the middle of a setup that felt like a trap. In the beds of both trucks were men, 3 or 4 in each, all dressed in worn denim and flannel, all with the kind of rough, sunburned faces that speak of hard outdoor work. These weren't casual passers-by. One of the men was holding a shotgun. The man's wife went very still beside him. She put one hand on the edge of the door, fingers digging into the vinyl. She didn't say anything, but her posture told him everything. She was scared. So was he. The leader of the group, a broad-shouldered man with greasy hair and a beard starting to gray, jumped down from the bed of the front truck. He moved casually, as though he did this sort of thing often, like this was a game he'd played before. He walked up to the Triumph with a kind of lazy confidence. It was a nice day, and the convertible's top was down. The windows were already rolled down too. There was nothing between the couple and this man. He leaned down and peered inside at them, his breath close enough to smell. His eyes roamed over the car, then settled on the woman in the passenger seat. He stared at her in a way that made her skin crawl. Slowly, a grin spread across his face. "That is a fine-looking woman you got there," he said. The words were simple, but the way he said them made the meaning perfectly clear. He wasn't complimenting her. He was hinting. Something hot and sharp flooded the husband's chest. His pulse spiked. Every instinct he had, from his training as a forest ranger, from the years of being alert in isolated areas, from the way he'd learned to read threats, told him this situation had just turned very dangerous. What the man didn't know, what none of the men knew, was that the driver of that little Triumph was not just some harmless car enthusiast. He was a trained peace officer, and he was armed. He kept a revolver under the seat of his car, within easy reach. As the leader approached and leaned into the car, the husband had moved one hand slowly, carefully, down beside his leg, fingers sliding under the seat until they closed around the grip of the pistol. He kept his face calm, eyes on the leader, while his heartbeat pounded in his ears. When the leader's implication made it clear that they were not just dealing with a simple robbery, but something much worse, the husband made his decision. Without giving himself time to overthink it, he grabbed the front of the leader's shirt with his left hand, yanked him forward so their faces were inches apart, and in the same motion brought the revolver up with his right hand and pressed the barrel hard against the man's forehead. There was a shift in the air. The men in the truck straightened, the ones closest to the shotgun glancing at each other. The leader's smirk vanished. For the first time, he looked surprised. "You will have your guys move that log in front of us," the husband said, voice low and steady, "or I will blow your fucking head off." The world seemed to shrink down to that small space, between the barrel of the gun and the man's skull, between the husband's eyes and the leader's. The wife sat frozen, barely breathing, watching the muscles in her husband's hand stand out white against the man's collar. For a long moment, nobody moved. The leader's expression shifted, a flicker of defiance crossing his face, followed by something like calculation. You could almost see the thoughts moving behind his eyes. The shotgun in the truck, the men behind him, the small car, the gun at his head. Finally, he said, "You can't get all of us." The husband didn't blink. "Sure," he replied, "but you will be dead." There are moments in life where everything hinges on one person's fear of dying. The leader might have been willing to gamble with other people's lives, might have enjoyed scaring strangers on lonely roads, but when it came down to his own skull, pressed against cold metal, his own blood suddenly felt like something he'd like to keep. A muscle in his jaw clenched. Slowly, he lifted one hand and motioned toward the truck in front of them. The men understood. They hesitated only for a second, then climbed down, unhooked the chain, and rolled the log away from the road. The path ahead opened, not by much, but enough that the Triumph could pass. "Slow," the husband said, still holding the leader's shirt. "Tell them to stay where they are." The leader did as he was told, his voice louder now, pretending this was all some casual change of plan. The other men stayed put, though their eyes burned with anger and humiliation, keeping the gun pressed firmly against the leader's forehead and his fist still twisted in the man's collar. The husband shifted the car into first gear and started driving forward. The leader had no choice but to shuffle alongside the moving car, bent over awkwardly, leaning into the door as the Triumph crept past the front log. The pickup behind them remained in place, its own log still blocking the road. But the husband's focus was on the space opening up in front of him. Once the car's front bumper cleared the log and he had enough room to steer around it, he released the leader's shirt in one sharp motion, kept the gun trained on him long enough to let the message sink in, and then floored the accelerator. The Triumph shot forward, engine growling, gravel kicking up behind it. In the rearview mirror, his wife later said she saw the men scramble and shout, the shotgun never rising in time. They didn't look back again. They drove until the road widened, until the trees lifted away, and the world felt bigger, less suffocating. They didn't slow down until they reached a more populated area, with other cars and houses and the ordinary safety of other human beings. Later, when he told the story to my father, the ranger admitted his hands shook once it was all over. Not in the moment. Then he'd been cold and calm, doing what needed to be done. But afterward, when the adrenaline faded and the reality of what almost happened settled in, he realized how close they had been to losing everything. His wife didn't talk much about that day, but she started locking her doors a little earlier at night, checking the windows a second time before bed. He continued to carry his pistol, continued to work as a ranger, continued to drive those same kinds of back roads, but he never again treated them as simple scenic routes. Because he understood something in a way most people don't. Sometimes the danger on a lonely road doesn't come from the wilderness. Sometimes it comes from people who think no one will ever find you out there. And on that afternoon near Concrete, Washington, on a quiet stretch of rural highway, it was only the steady hand of a man who knew how to shoot and the simple, hard fact that the leader loved his own life more than he loved the idea of hurting someone else that let them drive away. There are some stories that family members tell you that you just nodded along with, thinking they are exaggerating or maybe reminding things a little different than how they actually happened. But then there are other stories, the rare ones, that you believe instantly and completely just because of the way they are told. This is one of those stories. It was told to me by my grandmother, a woman who was never prone to flights of fancy or making things up. When she told this story, her voice would change. It would get quieter, more serious, and her eyes would look far away, as if she was seeing the dusty roads of her childhood all over again. She was 11 years old at the time, a young girl living in a world that was changing rapidly, but still held on to the old mysteries. The events took place in Turkey, in a region called Yozgat. Specifically, she was staying in a small, humble village called Sarakaya. In English, the name translates to yellow field or yellow rock, a name that perfectly describes the dry, golden hues of the landscape under the hot sun. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and life moved at a slow, deliberate pace. My grandmother was there on vacation, staying at her aunt's house. She loved her aunt dearly. To her, this woman was a second mother, a source of warmth and comfort in a strict world. The aunt was the kind of person who always had a ready smile and smelled faintly of rosewater and roasted coffee beans. My grandmother remembers the house vividly, with its thick stone walls that kept the interior cool during the scorching days and the heavy rugs that covered the floors. It was a place of safety, or at least it was supposed to be. The visit had been wonderful, filled with family meals and the laughter of cousins, but it was coming to an end. My grandmother was scheduled to leave her aunt's house that very day, to return to her own home and continue her schooling. It was early in the morning on the day of her departure. The sun hadn't quite risen yet, and the sky was that deep, bruised purple color that came right before dawn. My grandmother was still asleep, tucked under a heavy wool blanket. In the silence of the room, she began to dream. It wasn't a chaotic or scary dream. In fact, it feels incredibly real, hyper-realistic in a way that dreams rarely are. In the dream, she walked into the kitchen of the house. The kitchen was the heart of the home, always warm from the stove. She saw her aunt standing there, just as she did nearly every morning. Her aunt was standing by the small window, staring out at the sleepy village, holding a small porcelain cup of strong Turkish coffee in her hand. The steam from the coffee curled up around her face. In the dream, my grandmother said, "Good morning." Her aunt turned around slowly. She didn't look sick and she didn't look sad. She looked peaceful, radiant even. She smiled that familiar, comforting smile and gestured for my grandmother to sit at the small wooden table where they usually shared breakfast. My grandmother sat down, expecting her aunt to pour her a glass of milk or give her a piece of bread. Instead, her aunt just looked at her with an intensity that pierced right through the dream state. She spoke calmly, her voice clear and steady, echoing in the quiet kitchen. She said, "Tell your mum to wake me up. Don't wake me up yourself, okay? Promise me." My grandmother nodded in the dream, though she didn't understand why. Then her aunt added one more thing, a strange instruction that made no sense at the time. She said, "And if you see a brown bird, follow the bird. Do not lose sight of it." My grandmother woke up with a start. The dream faded, but the words stayed stamped in her mind. The house was quiet. She rubbed her eyes and climbed out of bed, shivering slightly in the morning chill. She remembered the first part of the instruction clearly. She walked out of the room and found her mother, who was already up and packing their bags for the trip. My grandmother tugged on her mother's sleeve and said, "Auntie wants you to wake her up. She said I shouldn't do it." Her mother looked at her with a confused expression, probably wondering why her sister would send a message through a sleeping child, but she nodded and went toward the aunt's bedroom. My grandmother didn't follow. She stayed back, obeying the dream without really knowing why. She didn't know then that her aunt had passed away in her sleep during the night. Her mother finding the body was a moment of grief. My grandmother was spared from witnessing directly because of that warning in the dream. The morning was a blur of hushed voices and adults moving quickly with serious faces. My grandmother, being only 11, wasn't told immediately about the death. The adults, in their grief and panic, decided to stick to the routine as much as possible to protect the child. Or perhaps they just needed her out of the house to manage the situation. She was sent off to school. At that time, she was attending a private school. This was during the era after the Ataturkian Revolution, a time of great modernization in Turkey. As part of these reforms, strict dress codes were enforced, and all school children had to wear uniforms. My grandmother put on her uniform, feeling the stiff fabric against her skin, and gathered her books. She felt a heaviness in her chest, a lingering sadness she couldn't explain, but she did as she was told. She left the house, leaving behind the secrets and the hushed whispers of the adults. The school day felt incredibly long. She sat at her desk, trying to focus on the lessons, but her mind kept drifting back to the dream. She could see her aunt's face so clearly, the steam rising from the coffee, the way the light hit the window. She kept replaying the words in her head. "Don't wake me up yourself." She had followed that rule. But what about the second part? If you see a brown bird, follow the bird. It seemed so silly. Birds were everywhere in the village. Sparrows, pigeons, crows. How would she know which one? Why would she follow a bird? It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, not real life. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was just a random firing of a sleeping brain. When the final bell rang, the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty roads of Sarikaya. She began her walk home. In those days, it wasn't uncommon for children to walk significant distances alone. The community was tight-knit, and the streets were generally considered safe. She walked along the dirt path, her black school shoes kicking up little clouds of dust. The road was relatively empty. She was lost in thought, looking at her feet when she heard it. Chirp, chirp. It was a loud, insistent sound. She looked up. Right there in front of her, in the middle of the path, was a small bird. It wasn't a colorful bird or anything majestic. It was a plain, dusty brown color, blending in almost perfectly with the road. It looked at her, tilting its head to the side, and chirped again. My grandmother stopped. She remembered the dream instantly. If you see a brown bird, follow the bird. A chill went down her spine. She looked at the bird, and the bird looked at her. She decided to keep walking, trying to step around it. She wanted to go home. She wanted to see her aunt. But the bird wouldn't let her pass. As she stepped to the left, the bird hopped to the left. As she stepped to the right, the bird jumped to the right. It was having strangely. Usually, a wild bird will fly away the moment a human gets too close. This bird had no fear. It stood its ground, flapping its wings aggressively and chirping louder and louder, almost screaming at her. My grandmother tried to shoo it away, waving her hands, but it just hopped a few feet ahead and stopped, looking back at her as if waiting. She finally noticed the oddest thing of all. The bird wasn't flying. It didn't seem injured. Its wings looked fine, but it refused to take to the air. It was hopping along the ground, moving with a surprising speed. It would hop a few yards, stop, look back at her, chirp, and then hop again. It was leading her. My grandmother, reminds the serious look on her aunt's face in the dream, made a decision. She changed her course. She didn't take the direct path home. She began to follow the brown bird. The bird led her through the winding streets of the village. It took her down alleyways and side streets she didn't usually take. She felt foolish, a girl in a school uniform chasing a hopping bird through the dirt. But she couldn't stop. The bird was relentless. If she slowed down, it would stop and chirp frantically until she sped up. It felt urgent. It felt like she was being guided on a mission. She walked for what felt like 20 minutes, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know where she was going, but the bird seemed to have a specific destination in mind. Finally, the bird stopped. It hopped up onto a low wall and fluttered its wings, chirping one last time before flying away into the sky. My grandmother stopped and looked around to see where she had been led. She was standing directly in front of the local police station. It was a modest building, but seeing the official emblem and the uniform of the officer standing near the entrance gave her a sudden sense of grounding. She was confused. Why had the bird brought her here? She stood there, catching her breath, looking at the door. Just then, the door to the station opened. A police officer stepped out, perhaps coming out for a breath of fresh air or to start his shift. He looked down and saw the little girl standing there in her school uniform, looking disheveled and confused. He smiled kindly at her, about to ask if she was lost. But as he looked at her, his gaze lifted. He looked past her, over her shoulder, and his expression changed instantly. The smile disappeared, replaced by a look of shock and immediate alertness. His hand dropped to his belt. My grandmother, seeing the change in the officer's face, turned around to see what he was looking at. Her blood ran cold. Standing just a short distance behind her, maybe 20 feet away, was a person. It was a man, looking rough and menacing. He was holding a large black pouch or sack in his hands, gripping it tightly. Next to him, idling quietly with the engine running, was an old, battered farmer's truck. The passenger door was opened. It took a second for her young mind to put the pieces together, but the officer understood immediately. This man had been stalking her. He had been following her as she walked home from school, waiting for the right moment, likely a quiet stretch of road, to grab her, stuff her in the sack, and throw her into the truck. If she had stayed on her usual path, the path that went through the quieter, more isolated parts of the village, he would have taken her. No one would have seen. She would have just vanished. But because she had followed the bird, because she had taken the erratic, winding route through the town, she had unknowingly kept herself out of his reach, or made it difficult for him to grab her without testimony. The bird had led her to the one place where he couldn't touch her. The kidnapper, seeing the police officer staring right at him, panicked. He realized his plan was blown. He jumped into the truck, slammed the door, and the vehicle screeched away, kicking up a cloud of dust as it sped out of the village. The police officer rushed over to my grandmother. He ushered her inside the station, asking her if she was okay, if she knew the man. She was shaking, unable to speak, the reality of what had almost happened crashing down on her. The officer, realizing she was in shock and clearly a potential victim of an attempted abduction, decided to escort her home personally. He didn't want her walking the streets alone after that. The ride home in the police vehicle was silent. My grandmother sat in the back, her mind racing. She thought about the bird, the brown bird that wouldn't fly, the brown bird that her aunt had told her to follow. When they pulled up to her aunt's house, there were cars outside. Family members were gathered. The atmosphere was heavy with mourning. The officer walked her to the door and spoke to her mother, explaining what had happened with the man and the truck. Her mother listened, her face pale, holding her daughter tightly. It was too much tragedy for one day. After the officer left, my grandmother was brought inside. It was then that she was gently told the news. Her aunt had passed away. She had died in her sleep early that morning, around the same time my grandmother had been dreaming. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her aunt was gone. But as she sat there, crying, the pieces of the puzzle clicked together. The dream wasn't just a dream. It was a goodbye, and it was a rescue mission. Her aunt knew she was dying. She knew she couldn't be there physically to protect her niece anymore. In that space between life and death, she had reached out. She had warned her not to see the body in the bed, sparing her that trauma. And she had foreseen the danger that was waiting for the girl on the walk home. She knew about the man in the truck. Since she couldn't walk her home herself, she sent a guide. She sent the brown bird. My grandmother grew up telling this story to her children and her grandson. She never wavered on the details. She always describes the kitchen in the dream with the same clarity, the smell of the coffee, the calmness of her aunt. And she always described the bird the same way, the bird that hopped instead of flying, the bird that saved her life. She believes with every fiber of her being that her aunt's love was so strong it transcended death for just one day, to ensure that the little girl she loved made it home safely. And looking at my grandmother, seeing the conviction in her eyes, I believe it too. I married my college sweetheart right after we graduated, thinking that the life ahead of us would be calm and predictable. I was young enough to believe that love alone was enough to carry a marriage, and stubborn enough not to see the cracks forming beneath the surface. The first few months after the wedding felt normal, even warm at times, but slowly things took a turn neither of us really knew how to handle. It wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was more like an engine quietly losing power during a long drive. One day you look around and you're not sure when the confidence that held everything together disappeared. After about a year, it became clear that it wasn't going well. We barely spoke except about chores or bills. Every conversation felt like stepping on broken glass, and neither of us had the energy to fix what was falling apart. I realized I needed space. Not a weekend away, not a break, but an actual move. She didn't argue. In a strange way, that hurt more than anything else. I packed a few bags, left behind a house that already felt unfamiliar, and drove across town with a silence in my chest that felt heavier than any suitcase. My older brother lived on the opposite end of town in a big house he almost never used. His company had relocated him for a long-term project, so he was renting a place in another city and only came home every few weekends. His house was large but neglected, almost like it had been forgotten by time. When I called him and explained what was going on, he told me I could stay there as long as I needed. At least until he sold it or until I figured out my life again. It felt like a lifeline. When I arrived, the place looked even rougher than I remembered. Some rooms smelled faintly of dust and old wood. The paint was worn and scratched. The floors squeaked loudly with every step, and the bathrooms looked like a project someone had abandoned halfway through. But I had time. Too much time, if I'm being honest. And fixing the house felt like a distraction I desperately needed. My brother handed me a prepaid debit card for materials and told me to do whatever I thought the place needed. So in the evenings after work and on weekends, I sanded floors, painted walls, scrubbed tiles, retouched woodwork, and tried to make the old house feel alive again. Over a few months, the place changed little by little. I painted every room, sometimes twice. The wooden floors took days of sanding and staining, but when I stepped back and saw the dark, polished wood gleaming under the light, I felt proud for the first time in months. I retiled both bathrooms and installed a new toilet and shower, learning a surprising amount from YouTube videos and trial and error. My brother covered the costs, but the work, the sweat and time and aching muscles, that was all mine. And honestly, having something to focus on might have been the only thing keeping my mind from spiraling. The very last room I tackled was a bedroom, near the back of the house. The kind with a built-in wardrobe that was practically part of the wall. Inside that wardrobe, the paint was a strange, dirty yellow with dark black smudges scattered like fingerprints or old stains. It bothered me every time I opened it. I thought, if I'm repainting the whole room, I might as well paint the inside of the cupboard too. I used the last of the white paint and brushed everything clean until it looked bright and new again. I left the cupboard doors open to let the paint dry and went to bed, tired but satisfied. It was a Friday night, and I remember thinking that once this room was done, the whole house would be nearly finished. Another piece of my life I had forced into order, while the rest of me felt anything but. The next morning, a Saturday, I woke up early to finish the final painting. The walls of the room had an odd design, a deep red on the lower half and a cream color on the top, divided by a wooden rail. It looked a bit old-fashioned, but somehow fitting for the room. I went into the hallway to grab the red paint, because I'd been touching up a missed spot earlier. Then I reached for the tray with the roller and brush inside. As I stepped back into the bedroom, my foot caught on the plastic sheet covering the floor. I stumbled forward and the tray flew out of my hands. The roller landed inside the sheet, so that was fine. But the brush bounced, slid across the floor, and shot straight into the open cupboard. I heard a soft slap, like a wet handprint. Annoyed, I picked up the brush and looked inside the cupboard. There was a mark on the wall, an elongated S with a long vertical line dripping down. It looked almost deliberate, like a weird symbol. I groaned under my breath because covering red paint over fresh white takes several coats, sometimes more. That meant buying more paint and wasting half a day. Out of frustration, I did something childish. I started to trace letters around the red stroke. I turned the elongated S into the start of a word, shit, but the H looked too much like an A, so I changed it to Satan instead. I stood there with the brush in my hand, feeling that strange combination of irritation and amusement you get when you're tired and fed up. Under the S, the long drip of paint gave me another idea, so I turned that into the vertical line of a K and wrote kill next to it. Satan Kill took up the inside panel of the cupboard, jagged and sloppy. I didn't think anything of it. It was just paint. I was going to cover it anyway. For the rest of the day, I focused on painting the room. I lost track of time and kept working until the sun set. I didn't even notice the ache in my back until I finally put down the roller. While leaving, I looked into the cupboard again. The red letters stood there like something whispering for attention. Maybe because I was tired, maybe because the room felt too quiet. I picked up the brush again. I added the words, "orders you to," between Satan and kill. Satan orders you to kill. It still didn't mean anything to me. It felt like a private joke with myself after a long, exhausting day. I went downstairs for something to eat and then straight to bed. On Sunday morning, the first thing I did was go out and buy more white paint. I came back, opened the cupboard, and rolled a thick layer over the words. But even after one coat, I could still faintly see it. I tried another layer, same thing. The red bled through like a ghost stain. Over the next week, I made it a routine. Every morning before leaving for work, and every evening after coming home, I painted one more coat over those words. I convinced myself the letters were visible, even when maybe they weren't. My mind kept pulling my eyes to that same faint shape under the white. It felt like seeing something out of the corner of your eye and turning your head but never catching it fully. When my brother visited the next weekend, I finally asked him to look. I wanted a second opinion. I opened the cupboard and stood aside. "Can you see anything on the wall? Any writing?" I asked. He squinted, leaned in close, and shook his head. "No, why? Should I?" he said. But I was certain I still saw it. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe just annoyance at having wasted so much paint. But I felt the message lingering there, faintly beneath every layer. Even though my brother insisted it wasn't visible, I spent another few days adding more paint, hoping my mind would stop looking for what wasn't there. Around that time, several people came to see the house with a realtor. I remembered one family particularly well, a mother, father, and teenage son. They walked through each room slowly, whispering to each other, checking corners, measuring spaces with their hands. They stayed far longer than any of the other visitors. I wasn't sure whether they liked the house or were just indecisive, but something about the boy made me uneasy. Maybe he reminded me of myself at that age, withdrawn and distracted. Eventually, I moved out. My brother sold the house. I got a new job, rented a clean little apartment in another town, tried to rebuild what was left of my life. I met someone new, and things slowly began to feel normal again, even warm in a way I didn't think I'd find after the divorce. I didn't think about the cupboard or the message again. It faded into the kind of memory you shake your head at years later, like remembering a prank you once played on yourself. Months passed, and then Christmas came. My brother invited me and my new girlfriend to his apartment in a major city. When we arrived, the place was bright and modern, with glass windows overlooking the streets far below. We sat in the living room drinking tea while soft Christmas music played. There was something peaceful about the evening, like life had finally steadied itself. Then, almost casually, my brother brought up the old house. "Man, I'm glad I'm rid of that place," he said. "It always gave me the creeps. Didn't it ever feel weird to you?" I told him it didn't. To me, that house had been a quiet refuge during one of the worst periods of my life. I didn't feel scared there. I felt tired, lonely, sad, but not scared. He looked at me strangely, like he was surprised. Then he set his cup down and said something that settled into my stomach like a stone. "Did you hear what happened to the family that bought it?" I shook my head. Their teenage son killed his parents. He hid their bodies in a cupboard. For a moment, I didn't breathe. I thought of every cupboard in that house, but one image pushed forward. White paint, faint red lines beneath the words, "Satan orders you to kill," buried under layers and layers of white. My mouth went dry. My brother kept talking, saying something about the news article, the police investigation. how shocking the whole thing was. But his voice sounded distant, like it was coming through water. All I could picture was the boy's face when he walked through the house, the way he lingered in the rooms, the silence in his expression. I remembered my paintbrush hitting the cupboard wall, the messy red words I scribbled in frustration, the way I convinced myself the message was still visible even after a dozen coats of paint. The uneasy feeling I felt when that family walked through the rooms. The teenage boy who said almost nothing and stared at the walls too long. I didn't say anything to my brother about what I had painted. I couldn't. I don't know why. Maybe I felt guilty, even though it didn't make sense. Maybe I knew how insane it would sound. Maybe part of me never wanted to see that cupboard again. But sometimes late at night, I wonder if the boy saw something faint beneath the layers of white, something he wasn't supposed to see, something that wasn't meant to stay there, even though I told myself it was gone. And I wonder, even now, if the paint ever fully covered it at all. When I think back to my teenage years, from around 1990 to 1997, the memories come to me in a strange mix of ordinary suburbia and unexplained moments I still don't have the right words for. My family lived in Naperville, Illinois, in a quiet subdivision that looked like dozens of others built during the 1970s. The houses were nearly identical, boxy shapes, brick fronts, big windows, well-trimmed lawns, and narrow driveways. Nothing about them suggested anything unusual. Ours certainly didn't. It was the kind of place where nobody locked their doors until late at night. Kids rode bikes in circles until the streetlights came on, and every house smelled like carpet cleaner and someone's mom's casserole. I was a teenager back then, class of '96, go Skins, and life felt loud, busy, and normal. School, friends, part-time jobs, garage bands, the usual suburban routine. But mixed into those years was something strange, something small enough to laugh at, yet unsettling enough that even today I can still hear certain sounds in my head exactly as they were. When I joke about it now, I call it the ghost parrot. A ghost that didn't whisper, didn't move objects across the room, didn't moan or rattle chains, just mimicked things, sounds specifically, sounds that had no business repeating themselves. One of the first times I noticed it, I was standing in the kitchen late one afternoon getting ready for a school project. I dropped a handful of colored pencils on the tile floor, maybe 20 of them. They hit the ground with this chaotic clattering sound that only a mess of pencils can make, sharp and quick and uneven. I swore, picked them up, and figured it was just another clumsy moment in the life of a teenager who never knew where his own limbs were. The next day, my brother and I were upstairs in the hallway, heading into our rooms, when we heard it again. The exact same sound. Not similar, not something like it. The exact same clatter of 20 pencils falling onto tile. It came from the bathroom between our rooms, loud enough that we both froze. It was so precise that it felt like someone had recorded the moment and hit play. We looked at each other with wide eyes. Then, because we were teenage boys, and because being scared wasn't something we admitted lightly, we burst out laughing. We walked into the bathroom expecting to find at least one pencil, maybe more. The floor was empty. "Ha! Nice one," I said, pretending I wasn't unsettled. "Yeah, hilarious," my brother said, shaking his head like he was trying to convince himself. That joking became our shield. Anytime something strange happened, we laughed it off and called it the parrot, our invisible sound-copying roommate. Nights were when things usually came alive in that house, though not always in ways that made sense. We had a tomcat who treated the house like his personal racetrack. Every night he tore up and down the stairs, claws digging into carpet, his body thumping against the steps as he chased something we could never see. The sound was so familiar that it became part of our bedtime routine. Claws, running, thumping, turning, claws again. My dad hated it. He would shout from his bedroom, "Somebody stop that damn cat! I don't have money to replace the carpet every year." One night, the familiar sound echoed through the house. Scratching, running, the thump of paws hitting the landing. Dad started yelling again. My brother stepped out of his room, ready to grab the cat and lock him somewhere calmer. A few seconds later, he opened my bedroom door. I was sitting on my bed reading. "You heard him, right?" he asked. "The cat?" "Yeah, he's been at it for 10 minutes. "Us too," he said. He looked pale, like something had drained the color from his face. "It's just that..." He hesitated. "What?" He motioned for me to follow him. I put down my book, walked down the hall, and stepped into his room. He opened the closet door slowly. Inside, our tomcat was curled up in the clothes hamper, fast asleep. So deeply asleep that he didn't even twitch when the closet door creaked open. "I didn't know he was in here," my brother whispered. "I just opened it now." We both turned toward the stairs. The house was silent, completely unnervingly silent. I didn't even bother pretending to be brave. I grabbed my pillow and slept on my brother's floor that night. From then on, weird noises became something of a background hum in the house. Things repeating, footsteps when nobody was walking, the occasional laugh echoing faintly from somewhere downstairs when everyone was upstairs. After a while, we became almost numb to it. It was just easier. But things changed when the house itself began to change, when people started leaving. By '96, my brother had moved to St. Louis. My parents split. My father moved out. It was just me and my mom left in the house, trying to keep it clean and polished for realtors and potential buyers. I was barely home. Between school, work, friends, and all the ways teenagers avoid being around grown-up problems, I spent the majority of my time out. One afternoon, Mom said something that made me stop in my tracks. "It's not happy about all the changes," she said casually, like she was talking about the weather. "Acting out, having a tantrum, I expect." "What's not happy?" I asked. She looked at me like I already knew the answer. "The house," she said, "and the dog isn't happy either." She meant her Jack Russell Terrier, a jittery little thing that had always been skittish but adored her. I didn't push for details. At 17, your world revolves around everything except your own family's emotional lives. I shrugged it off and went about my business. Things escalated the weekend. My dad came over to help clean and reorganize the basement. A pipe had sprung a leak and soaked several boxes of documents, photos, and all the random things families accumulate over decades. We spent the whole weekend hauling everything across the basement to the opposite wall. It was exhausting work, lifting boxes, sorting through old books, childhood toys, newspaper clippings, winter clothes, decorations, tools, the kind of labor that leaves your hands sore and your back stiff. By Monday afternoon, it rained again. When I got home at the same time as my mom, something was clearly wrong. The dog was shaking violently in her arms, running back and forth between her and the basement door like she didn't know where to be. Mom said she had finally put the terrified dog in the car and driven to McDonald's just to escape the house for a while. I shrugged. At 17, everything feels like drama that has nothing to do with you. I didn't connect any dots. On Tuesday, Dad came back to grab a few remaining boxes. We heard him almost immediately. "God damn it!" he yelled. The sound exploded up the stairs. He started cursing loudly, each word sharper than the last. Mom's face went white. I followed Dad to the basement steps, not sure what to expect. He turned toward her, furious. "Why did you move everything back? Why? The boxes are soaked now." She looked genuinely confused. "I didn't move anything." I went down the steps and saw for myself. Every box, the dozens we had moved over the weekend, was now on the opposite side of the basement again. but not neatly stacked like we had left them. They were standing on their sides, lids facing outward, leaning awkwardly against the wall like someone had dragged them one by one and set them up with no care. The floor beneath them was soaked again. Dad swore under his breath, muttering something about Mom doing it out of spite. Even today, he still chooses to believe she did it, despite her physical condition and despite the fact that moving that many heavy boxes alone in one day would have been impossible for her. Neither of us kids ever believed she had anything to do with it. Shortly after that, the house behaved differently, more erratic, more aware, if that makes sense. We were showing the house to potential buyers, so the basement door had to stay closed. Normally it stayed open because the cat's litter box was down there. For 6 years, it had never been shut. One evening I was watching TV in the family room. My mom was outside brushing the dog in the backyard. The sliding glass doors were open enough for us to see each other. I was half paying attention to the show when I heard someone knocking. It wasn't a soft knock. It was insistent, sharp, almost impatient. I stood up, listening. It wasn't the front door. Our front door was metal, and the sound was definitely coming from wood. It wasn't the back door either, because that was sliding glass. I glanced toward my mom through the glass. She raised her eyebrows, mouthing, "Well, answer it." "I'm trying," I mouthed back. Then something clicked in my head. There was only one wooden door left in the house that could make that sound. As soon as the realization hit me, the knocking stopped. I walked into the kitchen slowly, like moving too fast might wake something up. I stood in front of the basement door, hand hovering over the knob. The house was completely still. No footsteps, no voices, no echoes of claws down the stairs. Finally, I opened the door. Nothing was there. Just the darkness of the basement, still and heavy, smelling faintly of cardboard and cement. After that day, we never closed the basement door again unless a realtor told us we had to. The house seemed calmer when it was open. We sold the house not long after. My mom and I moved on. My brother stayed in St. Louis. My dad found a place of his own. Life scattered us in different directions. But every now and then, especially late at night, when the world is quiet and houses settle into their foundations with soft creaks, I swear I still hear that sound. Pencils hitting tile, claws on carpet, knocking on a wooden door that isn't there anymore. And sometimes I wonder whether the house was ever empty to begin with, or if the thing that mimicked us stayed behind, waiting for the next family who didn't yet know what kind of roommate they were getting. He arrived late in the evening, long after the sun had gone down behind the highway. The hotel stood alone at the edge of town, an old brick building with narrow windows and a slanted roof that looked older than it probably was. The neon sign flickered in and out, buzzing softly, casting a pale red glow over the empty parking lot. He was tired after a long day of driving and just wanted a warm bed and a quiet place to sleep. Inside, the hotel lobby wasn't much to look at. Faded wallpaper peeled slightly at the corners, the overhead lights hummed, and the carpet had the kind of pattern that seemed designed to hide stains. Still, it was welcoming enough. Behind the front desk stood a middle-aged woman with a calm but tired expression, as if she had explained the same rules to people countless times before. "Checking in?" she asked, offering a faint smile. "Yes. Reservation under Carter," he replied. She found his name, handed him a key attached to a brass tag, and slid a form across the counter. After he signed it, she paused, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the desk. Something in her expression changed. Just slightly, but enough that he noticed. "There's something I should tell you," she said. "On your floor, as you walk to your room, you'll pass a door with no number. It's locked. Nobody is allowed inside. Ever." He blinked, unsure if she was joking. "All right," he said slowly. She leaned forward just a little. "Don't try to open it," she continued. "Most importantly, do not look inside, under any circumstances." Her tone was serious enough to make him straighten up. People say odd things in small towns, but something about the way she said it made his skin prickle. "Okay," he said again, "I won't." She nodded like she had heard that response before, and it hadn't always been true. He took the key, thanked her, and headed toward the elevator. The hallway on the third floor was dim, lined with old paintings of forests and lakes. As he walked, he noticed the door immediately. It stood out even though it didn't look unusual at first glance. No number, no plaque, just a plain white door in a row of numbered ones. Still, something felt off about it, like it didn't belong there, like the hallway bent around it in a way he couldn't see. He didn't slow down. He didn't touch it. He went straight to his room and set his luggage down with relief. After washing up and changing into comfortable clothes, he let himself fall into bed. The mattress was soft, and the quiet hum of the air conditioner lulled him into a heavy sleep. The next night, however, things changed. He tried to ignore the whispering curiosity that kept brushing the back of his mind. The strange door kept returning to his thoughts, its blank surface, its quiet presence. It was as if it called to him, not loudly, but insistently, like a thought that won't go away. By late evening, he gave in. He opened his room door and stepped into the hallway, which was dimmer than usual. A few lights flickered softly. Everything felt slightly colder. He walked toward the door with no number. When he reached it, he saw that the handle was old and slightly tarnished, as though it had been touched by many hands long ago, but rarely in recent years. He tried the knob gently. It didn't budge. It was completely locked. He hesitated, remembering the woman's warning, but curiosity is a stubborn thing, especially when it has been denied. He bent down slowly, bringing his eye toward the wide, old-fashioned keyhole. A faint draft brushed against his face. The air that seeped through was ice cold, sending a shiver straight through him. He looked. At first he expected darkness, but instead he saw a room almost identical to his own. Same wallpaper, same furniture arrangement, same faint glow from the lamp in the corner. But there, in the far corner of the room, stood a woman. Her skin was white, not pale, not fair, white like porcelain, like someone drained of all color. She stood absolutely still, her back to him, her forehead resting against the wall, as if she were listening to something inside it. Her long hair hung down her back, also strangely lacking any color. She wore a gown that seemed old-fashioned, loose around her thin shoulders. He froze. His breath caught in his throat as he stared, trying to understand what he was seeing. There was something wrong about her stillness, something unnatural. He couldn't see her face, but he felt the weight of her presence, heavy and cold. After several seconds that felt much longer, he pulled away from the keyhole. For a moment, he almost raised his hand to knock. Maybe she needed help. Maybe she was hurt. But something deep inside him stopped him. A primal instinct. A warning louder than his curiosity. He backed away slowly, heart pounding, and returned to his room. He barely slept. His dreams were full of cold air and white shapes, standing in the corners of unfamiliar rooms. The next day, he tried to shake it off. It must have been some kind of illusion, a trick of the light, or maybe he was seeing reflections through the tiny opening. He told himself that over and over, though none of the explanations really satisfied him. By evening, he found himself standing in front of the door again. He didn't want to look. He knew he shouldn't. But that same strange pull drew him closer. He bent down again. Where he had seen a room the night before, he now saw only red. A flat, solid field of deep red. No shapes, no depth, no movement. just a red so vivid it almost hurt to look at. He blinked, leaned back, and looked again. Still red. It didn't make sense. Maybe they had covered the keyhole from the inside, put something in front of it, hung a cloth, moved furniture. But why red? Why so perfectly, uniformly red? His heart beat faster as he straightened up. Something inside him understood what had happened, even though he didn't yet have the words for it. Someone, or something, knew he had looked. He walked away, feeling the cold air follow him down the hallway. When he could no longer stand the uncertainty, he went down to the lobby. The woman at the front desk looked up from her paperwork. Her expression changed instantly when she saw his face. "You looked through the keyhole," she said flatly. He swallowed. I did. I'm sorry. What is that room? Who is in there?" She sighed heavily, as if she had been expecting this moment, as if she had seen it unfold the same way many times before. "I suppose I should tell you the story," she said. Her voice was calm but heavy, as though she carried a burden that never lightened. A long time ago, a married couple stayed in that room. They weren't ordinary people. They were different. Their skin was white, all of it, white like chalk. They almost didn't look human, but their eyes... She paused, her voice dropping. Their eyes were red. He felt the breath go out of him. "One night," she continued, "the man murdered his wife in that room. No one knows why. Some say he went mad, others say he was never sane to begin with. But the story goes that her spirit never left. She stays in that room, standing in the corner with her face to the wall, as if she's eternally listening for him. And she doesn't like to be watched, especially not through the keyhole." He remembered the cold air, the motionless figure, the perfect whiteness of her skin. He remembered the solid red he saw the next day. "Red," he whispered. His voice trembled before he even realized it. "I saw red today, the whole keyhole, red." The woman nodded slowly. "That wasn't the room being blocked," she said quietly. "That was her eye." He felt the world tilt beneath him as the meaning sank in. She had been standing on the other side of the door, watching him watch her. She knew. And the cold that followed him back to his room that night felt different than simple fear. It felt aware. Sorry to interrupt. If these stories feel familiar, there's a reason. Most people have experienced something they don't talk about. If you're still listening, leave a like and subscribe. It helps keep stories like these alive. And if something has ever followed you home, send it in. Let's continue. Grew up in a very small, quiet town in northern Ontario. The kind of place most people only pass through on their way to somewhere bigger. Houses were spread far apart, surrounded by thick forests and long stretches of empty road. The winters were cold enough to bite through your clothes, and the summers were short but beautiful. When I think back on those early years, everything feels far away, like a dream I can still remember pieces of, but never fully return to. One of the strongest memories I have from that time, though, is something that still makes my skin crawl. Even now, at 22 years old, living all the way in Texas. When I was 5 or 6, the highlight of most Fridays was the neighborhood gathering at Jeanette and Emil's house. They lived only a few doors down in a warm, cozy place that always smelled like fresh bread, old wood, and whatever meal Jeanette happened to be making that evening. Their kitchen was the true heart of that house, a crowded, bright room with mismatched chairs, peeling wallpaper, and a big round table where everyone gathered without hesitation. On those nights, adults filled the kitchen with laughter, gossip, and stories. The same people came every week, their voices becoming as familiar to me as the sound of the heater kicking on in winter. Since I was the only kid on the block, I usually didn't stay in the kitchen with the grown-ups. Instead, I'd go to one of the two guest bedrooms with my books or toys and play until I fell asleep. My mom would carry me home afterward, wrapped in a blanket or still half asleep on her shoulder. But one night, something disturbed that routine. Something I've never been able to explain. Something that still creeps me out every single time I think about it. I had been lying in one of the guest beds, holding my stuffed bear and waiting for sleep to come. The house was warm and noisy, familiar. I could hear the low hum of conversation from the kitchen, the clinking of dishes, the occasional burst of laughter. It was comforting in a way. But then, underneath those sounds, I heard something else. Something soft at first, then louder. A thin, trembling cry. It sounded like a baby. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the crying kept going, weak, sad, and steady. I sat up in bed, confused. There weren't any babies in our neighborhood. The nearest house was too far away for sound to travel like that. I had never heard a baby cry inside Jeanette's house before. I got out of bed and walked down the hallway, clutching my bear. When I reached the kitchen doorway, I tugged my mom's sleeve and told her I couldn't sleep because a baby was crying. She was talking to someone and didn't seem too worried. She gave me a little pat and told me gently to go back to bed. But Jeanette overheard. She looked at me with this strange, soft expression, almost knowing, almost sad. She opened the cookie jar, pulled out a chocolate chip cookie, and handed it to me. Her voice was kind when she said, "Why don't you go watch TV in the living room, sweetheart?" I nodded, grateful for the cookie, and went to the living room. The house was laid out so the living room was right beside the kitchen. Even with the TV on low, I could hear every word the adults said. At 5 years old, I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough to remember it. Even now, all these years later, their conversation sits heavy in my mind. The adults settled into their chairs, and I heard someone ask Jeanette, what made me think I heard a baby? Jeanette sighed like she was about to tell a story she didn't want to relive. She started talking in a slow voice that made the whole room go quiet. When we first moved here, she said, there was a cross hanging in the guest room. We're not religious people, you know that. But it was left by the old owners. There was a bunch of their stuff on the walls. A whole lot of junk, really. We took it all down. She paused. The kitchen grew silent except for the sound of someone stirring sugar into their coffee. Our bedroom's in the basement, she continued, since it's warmer by the heater. The guest rooms are upstairs. We used to hear something running around up there. Light steps, quick steps, like a kid playing. Someone laughed lightly. Probably the dog. Or the cat, someone else added. Jeanette's voice sharpened. That's what we thought too. But one weekend, Emile took the dogs hunting, and the cat wouldn't come inside that night, so I was home alone. She let that hang in the air. I was downstairs reading, she said, and I heard footsteps upstairs running, clear as day. I knew the house was empty except for me, so I went up to see what it was, and that's when I heard it. She lowered her voice so much I had to lean forward on the couch to catch her words. A baby crying. Every adult went silent. It wasn't far away, it wasn't outside, it wasn't the neighbors. It was in my house. Someone murmured, "Oh my God." You have to remember, she said, we backed onto fields that went on for miles. There was no way it was someone else's kid. And it wasn't a TV. It wasn't a toy. I know what I heard. She said she wandered through the house, checking every door, every closet, every corner. The crying wouldn't stop. It was coming from somewhere close, but she couldn't find it. She grew more panicked with every minute that passed. Eventually, unsure what else to do, she called the police. The OPP sent 2 officers, a younger guy and an older man with a weathered voice. They searched the house top to bottom. The crying had stopped by the time they arrived. They found nothing. But then the older officer looked at the house, really looked at it like he recognized it. he said casually. "I remember this house." Jeanette asked him why. He said he'd been called there 3 years earlier, back when the Harrisons owned the place. Their toddler had been found dead in its crib. "I remember hearing a fork drop." The officer suggested gently but with certainty, "Maybe put the cross back up." Jeanette didn't argue. She found the small wooden cross and hung it exactly where it had been when they moved in. And after that, the footsteps stopped. The crying stopped. She never heard anything again. The kitchen remained silent for several seconds. No one laughed this time. Nobody dismissed her story. Nobody joked. Even at 5 years old, I could feel the heaviness in the room, the way her words settled like cold air. Eventually, the adults went back to talking about other things, trying to shrug the story off. But the memory of it stayed with me even then, pressing at the edges of my thoughts. The night ended like usual. People said their goodbyes. My mom grabbed my jacket and my bag of toys. She walked down the hallway to the guest room to collect the things I had left behind. A few minutes later, she came back out with a strange look on her face. She didn't say anything until we were home, but when she finally spoke, her voice sounded different than normal, quieter, uneasy. "You know that cross Jeanette talked about?" she asked. I nodded. "When you were playing in the guest room, you must have knocked it off the wall." She said she found it lying on the floor beside the bed. And suddenly, everything made sense in a way that made my stomach twist. That was the night I heard the baby crying. That was the night the house felt different. That was the night the adults' voices grew tense, their words more careful. I didn't understand why something like a small wooden cross mattered so much. Not at 5 and not fully even now. But whatever was in that house, whatever lingered there, whatever cried in those walls, did not like being disturbed. And I have never forgotten the way my mother's face looked when she realized I had taken it down. Even now in Texas, far away from that small town, far from that old house, I sometimes think about that night. I think about the footsteps Jeanette heard when she was alone. I think about the crying she couldn't explain. I think about the officer who remembered the toddler, the crib, the silence that followed. And sometimes if I let myself linger on the memory too long, I swear I can still hear a soft, distant cry, one that never quite stops, one that never entirely leaves. When I was 17, I thought I understood the kind of dangers that existed in my small hometown. The place was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The streets had no lights, the houses sat far apart from each other, and everything was surrounded by thick woods that seemed to swallow sound. Nothing major ever happened there, nothing to make you feel unsafe. Except for one thing, one incident everyone in town knew about, even if they didn't talk about it openly. A 5th-grade girl had been abducted about 10 years earlier. Her remains were found behind a little restaurant years later, but the case was never solved. It stuck in the town's memory like a splinter. Even as kids, we grew up with the story whispered as a warning, something that always lingered in the back of your mind whenever you walked home alone at night. Still, by the time I was 17, I didn't think much about it anymore. Life moved on. I had friends, parties, plans, the usual teenage distractions. That night, I was at a friend's house for a party. It was one of those typical small-town gatherings, music too loud for the quiet neighborhood, people laughing and drinking, someone always trying to show off, and others just trying to unwind. The house sat on a long, dark road, spaced out from the nearest neighbors by stretches of trees that pressed up close on both sides. We had been drinking for hours, not enough to be wild, but enough that I knew better than to drive home. My friends knew I never liked risking it, so I always kept a sleeping bag in the trunk of my car. It was almost a running joke, like my safety net for nights just like this. Around 2 in the morning, the storm came in out of nowhere. I remember the sudden roar of thunder, the sound shaking the windows as everyone inside cheered like it was part of the party. Rain started hitting the house hard, not gentle drops, but thick sheets that blurred everything outside. Every few minutes, lightning would streak across the sky, lighting up the living room through the curtains. Eventually, I figured I should grab my sleeping bag before it got any later. I told my friends I'd be right back, pulling my jacket around me even though I knew it wouldn't help much. The second I stepped outside, cold rain slammed into me from every direction. It was the kind of rain that felt heavy, almost sharp, and it poured down fast enough to soak me in seconds. He hurried across the driveway, squinting through the darkness. The only light came from the windows behind me and the occasional burst of lightning that threw the whole street into sudden harsh brightness before dropping it back to black. My car was parked just beyond the driveway, partly in the grass, partly on the shoulder of the road. I could barely make out its outline. By the time I reached the trunk, I was shivering and frustrated. I popped it open and started digging through the mess I kept back there. Old school stuff, a toolbox, random jackets, and somewhere, buried under all of that, my sleeping bag. The rain drummed hard against the trunk lid above me, and thunder cracked again, booming so close it felt like the ground shook. I remember muttering something to myself, pushing aside a pile of things as I searched. A flash of lightning lit up the street again, bright enough to turn everything white for just a heartbeat. And in that brief moment of light, I saw him. A man, standing only a few feet away from me. He wasn't walking. He wasn't fumbling with anything. He wasn't yelling or asking for help. He was just standing there, completely still, facing me. I hadn't heard footsteps. I hadn't heard breathing. I hadn't heard anything. He was simply there all at once, like the lightning had carved him out of the darkness. He looked middle-aged, maybe late 40s or early 50s. His hair was wet and clung to the sides of his face, and his clothes were soaked through. But he didn't seem bothered by the storm. He didn't flinch when thunder cracked again. He didn't move his hands or shift his weight. He just stared at me with this strange, unreadable expression. For a second, I couldn't even process what I was seeing. My heart froze in my chest. I gasped or made some kind of sound. I honestly can't remember what came out of my mouth. The moment didn't feel real, not in the normal sense. It felt like something pulled straight out of a nightmare, sudden and silent and too close. Then the man spoke. He didn't say hello. He didn't explain why he was standing there. He didn't apologize for scaring me. His voice came out calm and casual, like we were two friends bumping into each other on a pleasant walk instead of two strangers on a dark, stormy road in the middle of the night. "I just love thunder and lightning storms, don't you?" Those were his exact words. I remember them perfectly. I will always remember them. Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the emptiness behind them. The tone didn't match the situation. Nobody talks like that to a teenager digging in the trunk of a car at 2 in the morning in the pouring rain. Nobody delivers a line like that with no emotion, no smile, no context. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Without thinking, I slammed the trunk shut so hard it echoed through the trees. I didn't even bother grabbing my sleeping bag. I turned and sprinted back toward the house as fast as I could. My feet slipped on the wet driveway, rain smacking my face, but I didn't slow down. My heart was pounding in pure panic. When I burst through the front door, dripping wet and completely out of breath, everyone turned to look at me. Most of them were drunk and laughing, not really paying attention, until they saw how pale I was. I told them what happened, the man, the lightning, what he said. A couple of them laughed, thinking I was exaggerating because of the storm or because I'd had a few drinks. But I wasn't joking. I kept insisting, pointing toward the driveway. "Just look outside," I said. "Look toward the street." A few people humored me. pulling back the curtain to peer out into the dark. The rain blurred everything, and for a moment it looked like there was nothing out there except the storm. Then another flash of lightning struck. It lit up the whole street, and there he was, the same man, walking slowly down the road, moving away from the house. Rain pounding on his shoulders, but his posture completely calm, like he was taking a casual stroll in perfect weather. Nobody laughed after that. The room went quiet. A couple of my friends backed away from the window like they were afraid he might turn around. We watched him disappear into the darkness between flashes of lightning. We locked the doors immediately, and no one slept much that night. The next morning, with the storm gone and the sunlight finally breaking through the clouds, everything looked normal again. Too normal. There were no footprints leading anywhere, no sign of where he had come from or where he went. Just wet pavement and trees shaking off the last drops of rain. We never found out who he was. We never learned why he had been standing so close to my car without making a sound. We never understood why he spoke so calmly to a teenager in the middle of a stormy night, or why he showed up in a place where no one ever walked after dark. Sometimes I wonder if he had been watching me before the lightning revealed him. Sometimes I wonder what he would have done if I hadn't slammed the trunk and run. Sometimes I remember the story of the missing girl, the one whose killer was never found. And sometimes, late at night, when thunder rolls across the sky, I can still hear his voice as if he's standing behind me again. I just love thunder and lightning storms, don't you? I still don't know what happened that night, even after all these years. I keep trying to convince myself that I must have been dreaming, that maybe I imagined it, or maybe I was half asleep and confused. But every time I replay it in my mind, every detail feels sharp and real. I remember the cold air of the room, the silence in the hallway, the weight of my blanket, the way the shadows moved. I was fully awake. I know I was. And yet, what I saw should have been impossible. I was around 9 or 10 years old, living in a house that sat in a neighborhood that wasn't exactly dangerous, but it wasn't the safest place either. My bed was pushed into a corner of my room, the kind of twin bed that always felt too small once you tried to stretch out in it. Across from the bed was a window facing our backyard. That window had layers of protection. Blinds on the inside, thick wooden frames, a mesh screen, and burglar bars on the outside. My parents always had this habit of over-securing everything. Even as a kid, I remember thinking no one could possibly get through all that without making a huge noise. On this night, there was no noise. I woke up for no reason, just snapped awake in the darkness. There wasn't any dream pulling me out of sleep. No sound from the hallway. Nothing. One moment I was asleep. The next I was staring at my ceiling, feeling like something had quietly shifted around me. I turned my head toward the window, and that's when I saw something move. At first it looked like a shadow, just a shape shifting behind the blinds. I squinted, trying to figure out if it was just my eyes adjusting to the dark. Then, almost casually, a face appeared through the window. Not behind the glass, through the glass. It was my father's face. My father, who should have been sleeping in the bedroom just down the hall. But there he was, outside the window, looking in at me. The sight hit me so hard I froze. It wasn't like he shoved his face against the glass or pushed it through anything. He simply appeared as if the window wasn't even there, as if none of the layers, glass, screen, bars existed for him. He looked completely solid, exactly like my real father, the same beard, the same tired eyes, even the same way he held his jaw when he was concentrating on something. But he was wearing a black beanie, something my dad never slept in, and the way he looked around my room felt wrong. Not curious wrong, but intentional, like he was searching for someone. And then he found me. The moment his eyes locked with mine, something cold dropped into my stomach. His expression changed. Not into something evil, not into something soft, just into a look of recognition. A look that said he had found exactly the person he came for. It was a calm expression, almost gentle, the kind of expression people use when they want to reassure you that everything is fine, except nothing felt fine. Every hair on my body stood up. Then, without hesitation, he stepped through the window. Not opened it, not broke through it. He stepped through it. His body passed through the material the way smoke passes through air, and once he was inside the room, fully standing on my floor, that's when I noticed his clothes. He was wearing a maroon long-sleeved sweater and black pants, the kind of outfit you'd imagine an old-style burglar wearing in a 1970s movie. The contrast between my father's face and this stranger's clothes made my brain twist. He wasn't my father. He looked like him, but he wasn't. He gave me this quiet smile, calm but unsettling. A smile that said I was the reason he was here. A smile that felt like a simple statement. I found you. I couldn't move, couldn't think. I just stared as he took one slow step toward my bed. The floor didn't creak under his foot. The air didn't shift. He wasn't loud or dramatic. He was just coming toward me, the way someone would walk into a room they already knew well. The terror finally snapped me free, and I screamed. I didn't just yell, I shrieked with everything I had. "Dad!" The moment the scream ripped out of me, the man's body changed. He broke apart, dissolving into a stream of grayish mist, like smoke getting sucked toward something. That mist shot straight into my blanket. The blanket puffed up like a small explosion of air had burst beneath it, lifting several inches before settling again. When it settled, it started glowing. Not glowing like a lamp or a flashlight. This glow didn't hit the walls or light up the room. It only illuminated the blanket itself, like the fabric had a light living inside it. It was bright, pure, almost peaceful. Beautiful in a way that scared me even more. Something happened to me during that glow. I don't know what. I felt a shift inside myself, a warmth and a heaviness. Something indescribable, something that didn't belong to me. Before I could understand it, I heard heavy footsteps pounding down the hallway. This time, it was my real father. He rushed into the room wearing only socks and underwear. Exactly how he always looked when he ran out of the bedroom in a panic. He scanned the room expecting danger, but everything looked normal. No broken window, no strange man, no glowing blanket. Just me, sitting stiff and silent, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. He tried talking to me, but nothing came out of my mouth. He assumed I had a nightmare. How was I supposed to explain any of it? He rubbed my head and gently pushed me back into bed, telling me it was okay, telling me to relax. I lay down, but I didn't feel relaxed at all. My brain was spinning, trying to understand what I had just experienced. My father kissed my forehead and left the room. I listened to every step he took down the hall until he was back in his room. Once his footsteps faded, the silence pressed in again. Then it happened. The blanket lifted again. The mist poured back out of it, rising into the center of the room. And suddenly, he was there again. The same figure, the same face, the same not my father man, standing exactly where he had stood before. But this time he wasn't smiling calmly. This time he wore a different expression, a small smirk that carried a strange message, something like a silent goodbye. It felt like he was saying he did what he came to do, and that whatever it was, I'd just have to live with it. He paused for a moment, watching me, almost like he was checking if I understood. Then he turned, walked back toward the window, and stepped through it again. No sound, no struggle, no sign he had ever been there. He just vanished. I sat frozen in my bed for what felt like hours, staring at the window, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. Eventually, I pulled the blanket up to my chin, feeling the leftover warmth of that glow, wondering if the glow had been real or something my mind invented to make sense of everything. I stayed awake until morning, too scared to close my eyes. As an adult, I still don't know what that thing was. It wasn't a dream. I've had nightmares, and none of them feel like this memory. None of them stay this sharp, this vivid, this grounded in physical sensation. Whatever it wasn't my father, and it wasn't human in any normal sense. But it knew me. It came for me. And after that night, I always felt like a piece of something strange followed me. That night was just the beginning. A lot of other things happened throughout my life. Unexplainable things, terrifying things, but this was the earliest one I can still describe in perfect detail. Even now, I'm still confused about what really happened, and I don't know if I'll ever understand it. I was home alone that evening, the house feeling bigger and quieter than usual. My boyfriend had been away for a couple of weeks, and that night he was finally supposed to come back. I had work the next morning at 6:30, so the plan was simple. Shower, get ready for bed, and be asleep by the time he arrived. It wasn't that I didn't want to see him. I was just exhausted and needed whatever rest I could get. Waking up even 10 minutes earlier felt like a punishment when you already have a long day waiting for you. I had just stepped out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, still dripping water onto the bathroom floor. Even though it was summer and the air was warm, I didn't want to sleep with wet hair because mine has a habit of drying into weird kinks and bends overnight. Then I'd have to wake up earlier to fix it, and that was something I absolutely refused to do. So I plugged in my hairdryer, flipped my head upside down, and started blowing my hair dry. I had barely been drying for 30 seconds when I thought I heard something. Faint, distant, like a muffled thump. I paused, lifting my head. For a moment I wondered if maybe my boyfriend had gotten home early. That wouldn't be impossible. Sometimes he surprised me when he missed me too much to wait until the planned time. I glanced toward my dog, who was sprawled across the bed, snoring like a creature who had never known stress in his entire life. If someone were home, especially my boyfriend, my dog would have launched himself off the bed, tail wagging like a propeller, making excited circles around the room. But he didn't even lift his head. That told me everything I needed to know. I must have imagined the noise. I sighed, flipped my hair forward again, and turned the dryer back on. But not even a minute passed before I heard something else. This time it didn't sound like it came from outside. It sounded like it was downstairs. I stopped again, lifted my head, and turned the dryer off. The sudden silence felt heavy. I whistled softly to see if maybe the dog would react, but he merely cracked one eye open and went right back to sleep. So again I told myself I was imagining things. It had been a long week. I was tired. The house was quiet. Your mind can make stories out of shadows when you're alone. I went back to drying my hair, but I barely made it another 30 seconds before something happened that I couldn't ignore. The floor beneath me, the old wooden upstairs floor that creaked under every step, shook. Just slightly. Just enough to feel, as if someone downstairs had slammed a door, a cabinet, something solid. My heart leapt into my throat. Someone was here. It wasn't my boyfriend. He would have called out. He always did. He never tried to sneak into the house quietly. And if he came upstairs, he would have walked straight into the bathroom to say hello or scare me in some playful way. But this was different. This felt wrong. I set the hairdryer down carefully, trying not to let the floor squeak. I walked slowly toward the stairs, forcing myself to breathe, even though my chest felt tight. When I reached the top of the staircase, I called out. Just a simple greeting, not too loud, trying not to sound scared. No answer, no footsteps, no movement, nothing. I turned around and looked at my dog. He was wide awake now, sitting up stiffly. His ears were pointed toward the stairs, He let out a low, confused sound like a small murph, as if to say, "I hear it too. But I'm not going down there first. You're the human. You go." My stomach twisted. If even my 70-pound dog didn't want to check, then something was definitely off. I spotted my phone sitting on the kitchen counter downstairs. My heart raced as I walked halfway down the stairs, reached out, grabbed it quickly, and bolted back up to the bedroom. I sat on the bed, clutching the phone tightly, listening for anything. But nothing came. No noises, no footsteps, not even a creak. After several minutes of silence, I started to feel ridiculous. Maybe I really did need to grow up. Maybe being home alone messes with your senses more than you realize. Maybe houses make random noises when you're hyper-aware. So I stood up, telling myself I was absolutely done overreacting. I walked back into the bathroom, picked up the hairdryer again, and promised myself this would be the last attempt. Just finish the damn hair, go to sleep, stop being paranoid. But a small part of me wouldn't relax. Something inside me felt tight and uneasy. The air felt different, heavy, too still. I looked at the dog again. His lips were curled back slightly now, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He wasn't barking, but he was warning. That scared me more than everything else. Dogs don't lie. Dogs don't hallucinate. Still, I flipped my head upside down again. Maybe it was stupid bravery or denial, but I needed to finish. I needed to pretend I wasn't afraid. So I closed my eyes and turned the dryer on. It was one of the biggest mistakes of my life. After a moment, I opened my eyes again, and that was when I saw them, a pair of feet standing right in front of me. And they were not my boyfriend's. Every thought in my mind evaporated. I launched myself backwards, slamming against the bathroom wall with so much force that the mirror rattled. A violent wave of cold fear slammed into my chest, so intense I felt sick. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My entire body shook uncontrollably. Something primal ripped out of my throat, a sound I didn't even know I could make. It came from somewhere deep inside me, a place reserved for sheer, blinding terror. All I managed to say was one word: Jesus. It didn't even sound human. It was a guttural, desperate cry. I couldn't look up, couldn't make myself see who was standing there. My brain told me I was about to fight for my life. Every instinct screamed that someone had broken in, that I was trapped, helpless, alone. Where was my dog? Why wasn't he protecting me? Why wasn't he launching himself at whoever it was? My mind spun in circles, filled with panic. I squeezed my eyes shut, expecting the worst. And then I heard a familiar voice. Gasp. When I finally lifted my head, I saw my mother standing there, clutching her chest like she was about to faint. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. I had terrified her as much as she terrified me. She had decided to surprise me by cleaning something downstairs while I showered. She didn't call out because she didn't want to disturb me. She didn't anticipate that sneaking upstairs to say hello would nearly give both of us a heart attack. For a moment, we just stared at each other, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. Then one of us laughed, then the other. Before long, we were both laughing uncontrollably, shaking, wiping tears from our faces. An hour later, when my boyfriend finally came home, he found the two of us still sitting together, laughing like maniacs, trying to explain the ridiculous series of events that almost resulted in one or both of us dying of fright. And my dog, he pretended the whole thing had nothing to do with him. The storm had been building since the early afternoon, starting as a gentle dusting of white powder before rapidly transforming into a full-blown blizzard. By the time the sun went down, the world outside was a swirling vortex of white and gray. Inside the house, however, things felt deceptively secure. The furnace hummed with a rhythmic, mechanical reliability, pumping warmth into the large living room. It was the kind of night that demanded heavy blankets, comfort food, and the escapism of a marathon movie session. Alara was 20 years old enough to enjoy the solitude of an empty house, but young enough to still feel the creeping unease that comes when the sun disappears and the shadows lengthen. Her parents had left for a weekend trip to the city, leaving her in charge of the sprawling suburban home. She had spent the first few hours reveling in the freedom, blasting music and cooking a dinner that consisted entirely of appetizers. Now, as the clock ticked past 10, she had settled onto the oversized beige sectional couch in the living room, a bowl of popcorn balanced on her knees and the remote control resting in her hand. The living room was an architectural showpiece designed to let in natural light during the day. An entire wall was dominated by sliding glass doors that looked out onto the backyard and the patio. During the summer, it was a beautiful feature, blurring the line between the manicured lawn and the interior space. But at night, especially a winter night, that massive expanse of glass turned into a black mirror. The blinds were currently pulled all the way open. Alara had intended to watch the snow pile up against the railing, finding a certain aesthetic beauty in the violence of the weather. But as the night deepened, the darkness outside became impenetrable. She turned off the overhead lights to reduce the glare on the television screen, leaving only the soft, flickering blue light of the movie and the small lamp in the hallway to illuminate the room. The house settled around her, groaning under the weight of the wind that battered the siding. She pulled her heavy wool blanket up to her chin, feeling the scratchy comfort of the fabric, and pressed play. The movie was a romantic comedy, something light and fluffy to counteract the howling gale outside. 30 minutes passed. The storm seemed to be intensifying. The wind whistled through the chimney, a high-pitched, mournful sound that occasionally drowned out the dialogue on the screen. Alara shifted on the couch, trying to find a more comfortable position. She was sitting perpendicular to the glass doors, her profile facing the yard. Every so often, the motion of the snow catching the light from the TV would catch her eye, a flurry of white sparks dancing in the void. It was during a quiet moment in the movie that she felt the urge to check the weather again. She turned her head to the left, looking past the arm of the couch and out through the sliding glass door. She expected to see nothing but the relentless driving snow and the vague outline of the patio furniture. Instead, she saw a face. Time didn't just slow down, it seemed to shatter. Her breath hitched in her throat, a jagged intake of air that felt like swallowing glass. Standing there, seemingly just on the other side of the glass, was a man. He was staring directly at her. The light from the television cast a ghostly pallor over his features, making his skin look gray and translucent. He wasn't moving. He wasn't knocking or trying to get her attention in a normal way. He was simply standing there, perfectly still, with a smile plastered across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a grotesque, exaggerated expression, too wide for his face, showing too many teeth. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. His eyes were dark, hollow pits fixed on her, with an intensity that felt physical, like a weight pressing down on her chest. He wore a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up, blending into the shadows around him, leaving only that terrifying floating face visible in the reflection of the TV's glow. Alara's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. The rational part of her brain tried to fire off explanations. Was it a neighbor whose car had broken down? A delivery driver lost in the storm? But the smile betrayed those theories. No one seeking help smiled like that. That was the face of a predator who had found prey. She didn't scream, not initially. The fear was too absolute, paralyzing her vocal cords. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, the sound of it deafening in her ears. She stared at him for what felt like an eternity, though it could only have been a few seconds, and he stared back. his expression unchanging, unblinking. Then the adrenaline hit. The flight response kicked in with violent force. She let out a strangled cry, a sound that was half gasp, half shriek, and scrambled backward on the cushions. Her hand knocked the popcorn bowl onto the floor, scattering kernels across the carpet, but she didn't care. Her only thought was that she was exposed. He could see her. He was watching her. Fear, panic, hot and electric, surged through her veins. She needed to call for help, but she was terrified that if she moved to run, he would smash through the glass. The door was just a thin sheet of transparency between her and a nightmare. If he saw her dialing the police, would that provoke him? Would he break in before she could even connect? Instinct took over. She grabbed her cell phone, which was lying face down on the cushion beside her, and in one fluid, desperate motion, she yanked the heavy wool blanket up and over her head. She curled into a tight ball, pulling her knees to her chest, creating a small, dark cocoon of safety. Under the blanket, the air was instantly hot and stifling. She could smell the fabric softener and the metallic tang of her own terror. The darkness here was different from the darkness of the room. It was close and suffocating, but it meant he couldn't see her. If she was hidden, maybe he wouldn't attack. It was the logic of a child hiding from a monster, but it was the only defense she had. Her fingers trembled uncontrollably as she unlocked her phone. The light from the screen was blinding in the small space. She dimmed it instantly, terrified that the glow would shine through the weave of the blanket and give her away. With shaking thumbs, she tapped the keypad. 911. Call. The seconds it took for the call to connect felt longer than her entire life up to that point. She listened to the ring, her other ear straining for any sound from the room beyond the blanket. Was that the sound of glass breaking? Was that the heavy tread of boots on the floor? Or was it just the house settling and the wind howling? 911. What is your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos in Ilara's mind. There's a man, Ilara whispered, her voice barely audible. Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and fast. There's a man looking in my window. He's on the patio. Please help me. I need you to speak up just a little, ma'am. Did you say there is an intruder? Yes, she hissed, pressing the phone so hard against her ear it hurt. I'm in the living room. He's standing at the glass door. He's staring at me. Please hurry. Okay, I have your location as 42 Oakwood Drive. Is that correct? Yes, that's it. Please send someone. Officers are on the way, honey. They're already in the area. I need you to stay on the line with me. Are you safe right now? Can you get to a locked room? I can't move, Ilara sobbed quietly. I'm hiding under a blanket on the couch. If I move, he'll see me. He's right there. He's right outside the glass. Okay, listen to me. You stay right where you are. Don't make a sound. Keep the blanket over you. Do you hear him trying to enter? Do you hear banging or glass breaking? Ilara held her breath, listening. The wind battered the walls, shaking the frames. I don't know, she whispered. The wind is so loud. I think he's just watching. All right, the police are 3 minutes away. You're doing great. Just breathe. Stay on the line. The next few minutes were an agony of sensory deprivation and hyper-awareness. Under the blanket, Ilara was blind to the room. She was trapped in a tiny world of gray wool and fear. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like a hand trying the door handle. She imagined the man losing patience. She imagined him lifting a heavy rock from the garden and hurling it through the glass. She imagined the cold winter air rushing in, followed by him. She clutched the phone like a lifeline, the operator's breathing on the other end, the only thing tethering her to reality. She began to pray, silent, frantic pleas to a universe she hadn't spoken to in years. Please let them get here. Please let the door hold. Please make him go away." "They're pulling up now," the operator said, her voice sharp and alert. "Do you see lights?" Alara didn't dare peek. "I can't look. I'm too scared." "That's okay. You stay covered. They are approaching the house now. Do not move until they identify themselves." Moments later, a new sound cut through the storm. It wasn't the wind. It was the heavy, authoritative pounding on the front door. "Police! Is anyone inside?" The relief hit Alara with the force of a physical blow. Her muscles, which had been coiled tight as springs, suddenly went limp. She threw the blanket off and gasped for air, the cool room feeling freezing against her sweat-dampened skin. Blue and red lights were flashing frantically through the front windows, painting the living room in a chaotic, strobe-like disco of colors. She scrambled off the couch, her legs wobbling so bad she almost fell, and ran toward the front door. She fumbled with the deadbolt, her fingers slippery, before finally throwing the door open. 2 police officers stood on the porch, snow swirling around them. They looked like giants wrapped in heavy coats, their hands resting near their belts. Behind them, a patrol car sat in the driveway, its lights cutting through the blizzard. "Oh, God, thank you," Alara cried, collapsing slightly against the doorframe. One of the officers, a tall man with a gray mustache and kind eyes, stepped forward and gently guided her back inside, out of the biting cold. "It's all right, miss. You're safe now. I'm Officer Miller, and this is Officer Hernandez. We're going to search the perimeter." Officer Hernandez, a younger woman with a sharp, focused gaze, was already moving. "Stay here with Miller," she said, pulling a heavy flashlight from her belt. "I'm going around back to check the patio." Alara huddled on the arm of the sofa, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders like a shawl. She watched as Officer Miller did a quick sweep of the ground floor, checking the closets and the bathroom, ensuring no one had entered while she was at the door. "It was so scary," Alara stammered, her teeth chattering from shock. "He was just standing there, smiling. It was evil." "We'll find him if he's out there," Miller reassured her. "The weather is on our side for once. Nobody moves in this snow without leaving a trail." Minutes passed. Alara could see the beam of Hernandez's flashlight jerking back and forth in the backyard through the sliding glass door, the same door where the face had been. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the swirling flakes and the accumulation on the ground. Finally, the back door handle jiggled, and then Hernandez knocked on the glass. Miller went over and unlocked it, sliding the door open. A gust of freezing air rushed into the room, carrying snowflakes that melted instantly on the carpet. Hernandez stepped inside, stomping the snow off her boots. She looked perplexed. She holstered her flashlight and looked from Miller to Alara. "Miss, are you sure about what you saw?" Hernandez asked, her brow furrowed. "Yes, of course I am." Alara felt a spark of defensive anger. "He was right there. I saw his face. I saw his teeth." Hernandez shook her head slowly. "The snow out there is fresh. It's been coming down hard for hours. There's about 6 inches of accumulation on the patio right now." "So?" Alara asked, confused. "So," Hernandez continued, gesturing to the darkness outside. "It's a pristine sheet of white. There are no footprints, not a single disturbance. If someone had been standing at this door 5 minutes ago, or even 20 minutes ago, there would be deep tracks. There's nothing. It's completely smooth." Alara felt the room spin. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I saw him. I swear I saw him. I'm not crazy." "We aren't saying you're crazy," Miller said softly, playing the mediator. "Panic can make us see things. Maybe it was a shadow from a tree branch, or a reflection of something inside." "It wasn't a branch," Alara insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "It was a man. He had a hoodie. He was smiling at me." The officers exchanged a look, the look of professionals who were used to dealing with frightened people who imagined threats in the dark. It was a look of pity mixed with fatigue. "We've checked the yard," Hernandez said, unzipping her jacket slightly as she warmed up. "There is physically no way a human being stood on that patio tonight. The laws of physics don't allow it without displacing snow." Alara sank her face into her hands. Had she imagined it? Had the isolation and the storm conjured a nightmare into reality? She felt foolish, humiliated, and still deeply, unshakably terrified. The image of that smile was burned into her retinas. It felt so real. Miller sighed. "Look, we'll do one more sweep of the property line just to be sure. But, miss, I think you're safe. Maybe try to get some sleep with the lights on." Hernandez pulled her flashlight back out to check the locking mechanism on the sliding door, ensuring it was secure. She shone the beam down at the latch. Then she paused. She didn't move for a second. She just stared at the floor. "Miller," Hernandez said. Her voice had changed. The tone of professional skepticism was gone, replaced by something sharp and urgent. "What is it?" Miller asked, stepping closer. Hernandez swept the beam of her flashlight across the carpet of the living room. "The snow outside is untouched," she said slowly, tracing a line of light along the floor. "But the floor inside isn't." Alara looked up, wiping her eyes. The powerful LED beam cut through the gloom of the living room. It illuminated the plush, cream-colored carpet. There, clearly visible in the harsh light, were dark, depressed patches. Wet footprints. They were large, heavy boot prints, soaked with melted snow and mud. They stood out violently against the clean interior of the house. Hernandez traced the path with the light. The trail didn't start at the front door where the police had entered. The trail started at the back of the house, from a secondary door that led to the garage hallway, a door Alara usually kept locked. The footprints led from the hallway across the living room carpet and stopped. They stopped right behind the couch. The silence in the room was sudden and absolute. It was heavier than the storm outside. Alara felt her blood turn to ice, a coldness that started in her marrow and radiated outward. She looked at the trail of wet prints. They ended inches from where her head had been resting. Miller's hand dropped instinctively to his holster. He spun around, scanning the room with renewed intensity. "Clear the rooms, now," he barked at Hernandez. Hernandez moved instantly, gun drawn, moving toward the kitchen and the hallway where the prints originated. Miller turned to Alara, his face pale. "Miss," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "did you lock the back door to the garage?" Alara stared at him, her mouth open, horror dawning on her like a slow-motion car crash. She remembered coming in with the groceries earlier. She remembered kicking the door shut with her hip because her hands were full. Had she turned the deadbolt? She usually did, but had she done it today? I don't know," she whispered. Miller looked at the wet patch of carpet directly behind the sofa. He looked at the sliding glass door in front of the sofa. He did the geometry in his head, and the realization made him look at Alara with an expression of profound, terrified relief. "You are very, very lucky," Miller said, his voice grim. "Why?" Alara breathed, tears spilling over again, but this time from a place of pure shock. "You said there were no footprints outside." "There weren't," Miller said, pointing a shaking finger at the space behind the couch. "Because the man wasn't outside, miss. He didn't walk up to the glass from the yard." He gestured to the spot where the wet footprints ended, directly behind where Alara had been sitting for the last 2 hours. "He was standing right here," Miller said. "He was standing behind the couch the whole time." Alara turned to look at the glass door. She looked at the reflection of the room in the dark pane. She saw the back of the couch. She saw the space behind it. "What you saw in the window wasn't him looking in," Miller finished, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It was his reflection in the glass. He was standing directly behind you, looking down at the back of your head." As the reality of it washed over her, the breathing she thought was the wind, the presence she felt in the room, Alara realized why he had been smiling. He hadn't been trying to scare her from the outside. He had been savoring the fact that he was already inside, waiting for the moment she turned around. If tonight's stories stayed with you, leave a like. Subscribe if you're drawn to the quiet kind of horror, the kind that doesn't need to shout. Some things don't chase you, they just wait. This is LURK. I'll see you next time.